Do you want to kick us off or should we just roll into it?
Let's roll into it. I have like 3 core predictions, and the first one is catalog ads. My second prediction, cash flow becomes the most talked about term.
You can't conflate cash flow and profitability.
AI creative is going to be viewed as good enough.
Those are going to start to see a lot more adoption, even on the brand side.
2026 is going to be a great year.
We're doing our 2026 predictions episode.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about 2026. It's still Black Friday. It's funny how like you have to think about next year and then you also have to execute in the moment. I think most brands going into Black Friday, when they're super well organized, they actually have enough time to hopefully at least some of the team members zoom out a little bit and think about next year. Some of this stuff I think is a little bit more applicable than others, but I have like 3 core predictions. And the first one is catalog ads. And with talking with specifically the team at Meta and also just seeing how the platform is evolving, I think catalog ads are going to become a bigger and bigger part of the advertising ecosystem in Meta. Historically, with catalog ads, those are essentially the ads where it dynamically pulls your product feed in, and then it will adjust which set of products it shows. Frequently, we see people opt to run like their all products catalog, where you're basically just giving Meta the entire catalog and saying, hey, go and get me this objective, depending on how you set the objective. You're now seeing in many cases, you can add the catalog beneath your core ad, be it a still image or a video. So in a way, catalog ads are infiltrating regular ads as well. And then what I think is like a sneaky, interesting feature ad for Meta is you have the ability now to have videos sync to your catalog ads. And if you like take this to an extreme, in a way, you could see a future where you don't just upload like your ads to Meta, you upload your ads that are product specific into a product feed, and then Meta can decide which of those ads to serve in a feed setting, be it in a carousel or a single image or video. So I think I don't think all ads are going to go that way, but I do think that with some of the new features getting added to catalog ads, they're going to be a bigger and more prominent player in your overall Meta ad spend. And I could foresee for many brands that percentage of spend going up. We're seeing now some brands where catalog ads did not work well previously, starting to work well. And then the brands who were already catalog heavy spenders, kind of just like they're spending even more on catalog. So I think that this is going to be a product inside of that Meta ecosystem that's going to continue to evolve. So I think that focusing on it and trying to make it better in many cases is probably going to be a winning strategy going into next year. And I think the key word is probably going to be video in the catalog.
And why do you think that shift is happening now? Like why, you mentioned that for some brands, obviously this has been this is not new, but you did mention that there's been sort of like a shift towards this. And it's clear that the platforms are putting more of an emphasis on this feature. So why do you think that this is the year of the catalog ads?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a few reasons. So I guess if you think about it from like a customer standpoint or just like an Instagram, Facebook user standpoint, if you're able to match the right set of products to that person in terms of what they may be interested in, logically, when you have the entire catalog to work with versus just one or a set of ads, you can arguably get a more personalized experience on the user level. I think that the downside to catalog historically is they've felt incredibly, I'm going to use the word transactional because that's the goal. You want to click on hey, this is the product that I sell, click on it and come look at it or maybe buy it. Whereas like video assets, they have more depth, they can be more story driven, they don't have to feel as transactional. I think catalog ads are going to feel less transactional while still being the best transaction driver in the Meta ecosystem for a lot of brands. So I think that is part of the reason that is occurring. And then additionally, if I'm Meta, I also want to try and make ads perform as good as well as possible, as easily as possible. Meaning like you want to basically bring a new advertiser into the ecosystem and have that advertiser basically plug in and yield outcome. And if you have to build all these ads, try a bunch of stuff versus just connecting your product feed and saying, Meta, go figure it out. I think that connecting your product feed and saying, Meta, go figure it out is probably the future. When it comes to like AI ads and all that stuff, obviously I think that still will have a role, but maybe there's a world that connects to the product feed. And I think that is probably not going to happen in 2026. And you're still going to have the ability, I think, to not only use that kind of stuff, but some of the features I'm seeing get pushed are like pretty awesome. I mean, there's some like bumps or speed bumps where like occasionally there'll be like an AI enhancement that looks terrible, but most of them I think are gonna look good. And although a good amount of them still look terrible, 5 years from now, do you still think they're gonna look terrible? Probably not. And when you're advertising in a platform, and the platform is purposely going a specific way, you're usually incentivized to use features that are in line with where the platform is going. It's been my experience.
That's super well said. I actually think that a good framing for this is anything that you sort of see now that's rolled out is always going to be the worst version of what that thing can be when you compare it to what it will be a year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now. To go back to your first point, I agree. I think that form factor makes a lot of sense. So that shift towards the catalog ads, that just makes logical sense in terms of how that gets merchandised. From my perspective, feeds, I think, are beyond just catalog ads going to be a really big driver in 26 and 27 of general kind of e-com and merchandising strategies. So I do think that I mean, there's always bias confirmation in that, but I do think that there is, like you said, that shift to form factor where feeds plug in really nicely into that ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. I will just say one caveat is like sometimes when new stuff comes out, it doesn't work well. So like it's a balance of like positioning your account in the path that the platform's going, but also realizing that like if you launch catalog ads today and they suck, like if you're selling 5 items, maybe catalog ads aren't for you still. Maybe they are, but like like, the whole point of the catalog is to give the user on the other side the most perfect experience based off of what they are most likely to engage with from a product standpoint that you otherwise wouldn't be able to give them if you couldn't have a catalog. If you have 5 products, you can get pretty darn close and maybe still have better creative because it's not a catalog. So just wanted to call out that caveat. My second prediction is more just in like what people talk about in ecom. So I think cash flow becomes the most talked about term. I think this year was incrementality. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago was like attribution. There's kind of these like buzzwords that I think people focus on and like going to say like
Margin.
contribution margin. That was probably last year. Yeah, but everyone still loves I love contribution margin. So it's one of the ones that I think is like has the most staying power. But like super simply put, and for some people this is going to be like brutally obvious, but I just want to like reiterate this. If you're selling water bottles, I'm just going to take my orange water bottle because I have it as an example, and I have 5 different colors of water bottles, and I buy 100 water bottles, and I buy 30 of these things, and the orange one sells super well, and it's super profitable. If I sell out of all of these, and I barely made a dent in my other colored water bottles, I could have profit, but I have to then go and make another purchase order before I have um, sold the other ones. So it's possible that I've actually created in that situation negative cash flow for me because I haven't got all my cash out of PO number one before I go and make PO number two. But I have contribution margin profit over here that is good. And I think that this is more for brands that have more SKUs. But if you think about how do you make your entity, your organization valuable, be it for shareholders or for potential exit outcomes someday, it is not only just profit, it's also cash flow. Because you want cash flow so you can actually take distributions. You want cash flow so if you have a potential acquirer using debt to buy your business, they can actually service the debt. Profit doesn't service debt, cash flow services debt. So there's a lot that has to be kind of, I guess, like focused on when it comes to cash flow optimization. But I think you're going to see more finance teams interacting with marketing teams in a way where not only is there now a profit target that the business is going for, there's also a cash flow target. And that actually causes marketing and sales to take different actions than when they're solely optimizing for profit. And then I think there's also going to be another layer of this where it's how do you prioritize the two? And I think that's where it gets tricky because there's pros and cons to doing both, and different business sizes I think smaller businesses with softer balance sheets will often have to go for cash flow. Bigger businesses with bigger balance sheets can sometimes worry a little bit less about cash flow and worry more about profit. But how do you balance the two? That's up for teams to decide. But prediction number two is cash flow becomes maybe the word of 2026.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also just to make it really clear, when you have, to your example, different SKUs that sell at different, let's say, velocities, you're gonna still you can sell them at the exact same profitability, but you can sell them at different rates. So on an accrual basis, there's gonna be a mismatch with what the cash flow coming into your business is versus the profit that you're accruing on your P&L. It's also just very important to, I know this is the obvious statement, but you can't conflate cash flow and profitability. Often the two kind of work hand in hand, but because you're recognizing your expenses and your revenue in a matching principle basis, you actually may sell through certain SKUs slower, albeit at the same gross margin, but you may not actually recognize that expense at the same rate that you recognize the expense of the other SKUs that you sell through faster, which means that you may have sold through the hero SKU of that PO and have to still go out and lay the cash out to buy the SKU that is driving the majority of the sales while the others basically lag. And even if you can get the profit out of those SKUs, it might take you 3 times as long to turn that inventory, which means that there is a fundamental mismatch in how quickly you're turning inventory A versus inventory B. And that means that your cash flow requirements are fundamentally misaligned. So it's super important. And I think like it kind of goes back to demand planning, which I do think for 2025 was also one of the keywords still. And I think started kind of picking up maybe towards the latter half. Maybe it's still a little bit of kind of dormant buzzword, but I do think that demand planning in the second half of the year started getting a little bit more traction. I think if I had to throw in a second prediction, I would say cash flow and demand planning become like very closely coupled sort of themes or buzzwords.
I think like demand planning or inventory planning or just the word inventory is kind of what connects finance and marketing the most. And I foresee that trend increasing. And I think that's where you're going to see some brands go and basically bridge the gap between profit and free cash flow and improve the underlying metrics of their business in both of those categories and get them more aligned. I think it's easier when you have fewer SKUs, when you have very durable, predictable revenue, i.e., mostly high LTV businesses. But when you have a large SKU count, the exercise of trying to optimize that relationship is difficult. And I think that it's going to get a lot better because I think the industry as a whole is kind of being, hey, this is like the next frontier of stuff to go and work on to better improve the quality of these businesses. My third 2026 prediction is AI creative. I think AI creative is already really good. You see it in used a lot. But I think that like if 2025 wasn't the year, 2026 is the year where like for most creative, specifically still creative, I think that AI creative is going to be viewed as good enough. And maybe that doesn't sound great, but I think that for a lot of creative, it's going to be viewed as like very much passable. People, brand owners, operators are going to be like, yeah, that's good enough. And that's probably going to increase the volume of creative. What does that mean for a brand? Maybe that means you can start making more emails. Therefore, you can make them more customized, better segments, more specific. What I don't think this means, though, is I don't think this means that you can necessarily easily go and improve your return on ad spend on top performing creative. This may not mean that you can go and increase the volume you can spend on assets with that ROAS target in mind, because I still don't think that when it comes to like actually getting outsized gains and really high, superior performance, you're often going to actually have to have truly creative that is truly differentiated, because if everyone has this kind of baseline creative ability due to AI, how do you actually break through the noise? You actually need good creative. Now, I think there might still be a short-term ARB opportunity for those who adopt the AI creative faster, because a lot of people still aren't. So you might actually be able to, in the short term, create that outsized gain. It's also possible with the ease of making creative, the ones who do adopt it early can basically test so much angle volume in terms of targeting different personas that there could be some breakthroughs. But I think in a weird way, it almost like democratizes creative a little bit for a lot of brands. And then the way you actually get you get that leverage is by taking it and making truly unique creative. So kind of a nuanced take, but I think that is my third primary ecom prediction for 2026.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I also think that the workflows are being fundamentally rewritten with the role AI is playing in generating creative in terms of like a year ago, year and a half ago, there were a handful of brands that I think everyone was using AI at this point for maybe farming different inspo, using it in copy, kind of in like a very sort of sidekick style way where it's, a co-pilot to your creative process, but by no means was anything that was generated usable. At this point, what we've seen the image models get to, and also like the deep knowledge based models that have been fed the right context, etc., they can really produce quite usable, quite high quality, whether it's copy or images that can be then deployed in real assets. But if we talk about like strictly fully end-to-end AI, where the asset is generated by AI, the copy is mostly generated by AI. I think to your point, those are going to start to see a lot more adoption, even on the brand side. Like the brands that are maybe historically were less comfortable testing those. I think even now, the questions, the conversations are starting just anecdotally from an onboarding perspective. There's a lot more questions this time around than last year, for example, around what AI creative process looks like, what generative processes look like, how much, are we allocating towards actually sourcing of, AI creative. And I don't think it's, like a one shot prompt where, you ask Nana Banana for an image and it gets back a perfect ad that you can use right away. There's an actual workflow change that comes with that as well. And I think more brands are starting to see that and integrate that with their own internal workflows. And then obviously on the agency side, how they interface with their third-party vendors as well, like what the expectation there is, how we're thinking about all these things, how we're thinking about tokens, all that stuff. So yeah, it's very exciting. And I do think that this is going to be a continued trend going to 2026.
I don't want to jinx it. I think 2026 is going to be a great year. But yeah, those are 3 predictions. We'll see what comes true. We'll see what doesn't. Going to be a fun one.